My dad told me a story about when he worked in a steel mill back in the 70s. He had been working there for a few months doing the overnight shift. They had a huge kiln in the factory where they would melt the iron pellets. The kiln didn't have a door though. Instead of a door, the opening would be bricked up when the iron went in. Then, when they went to extract the iron, they would take sledgehammers and knock the bricks down. Well, that night, he was working nearby the kiln when a guy started knocking the bricks down with a hammer. I guess one of the bricks were a bit stuck, so the dude tried to kick it out of the way. My dad said his foot went right through the kiln and, in a second, it was gone. Thigh, knee, and then nothing. My dad quit the next day and never worked in a steel factory again. But this reminds me of something that my grandfather told me as well. He worked in the Ford factory and witnessed a guy get decapitated in a steel press. The machine stopped working, so he stuck his head underneath it to have a look, and slam.
Just 3 weeks ago, I was working my night shift at a Days Inn in Nevada. A man called me at 11:30 p.m. and told me he had a reservation for the following day, but would be arriving early that night. He arrived at around 12 a.m. and pulls his big white van right in front of the lobby's large windows. He comes inside, leaving his van running, and I begin checking him into the hotel. I'm looking out the window at his van as I'm getting his info from him, and I see this stalking Mexican guy walk around from behind the van and up towards the driver's seat. I'm confused and staring, thinking it's this man's friend and they're renting a room together. Suddenly, the Mexican gets into the van, and the guest I'm checking in turns around and flips the fuck out as the van starts to take off behind the hotel so it can come around and leave. The guest is yelling at me to call 911, and I'm fucking freaked out and holding my phone that has 911 dialed, but I still had not called because I was so confused. I honestly thought this guy taking his van was his friend, trying to ditch him after a fight. It turns out the guest doesn't even know him. He was just completely out of nowhere, carjacked. He was on the phone with the cops when he was chasing the van before it took off, and handed it to me, so I explained everything to the operator. And sure enough, the police arrived within minutes. As they were pulling up, the guest looks at me and says, "My mom is in the van." I can't even believe this shit. I ran to the cop and told him, and many more showed up. They were desperately trying to figure out where she was with her phone and checking surveillance tapes. After about 10 minutes of me trying to pull up the video from the lobby windows, I hear all the cops speed off at once. About another 20 minutes later, and they're back with the guy's mom in the passenger seat. They found the carjacker not too far, trying to get on the highway, I believe. And luckily the lady wasn't harmed. Definitely the most terrifying experience at work for me. At one point, the guest was on the passenger side when the driver had tried to take off, but he stopped, and the guest was pleading with him. That shit scared me, and I was anxiously awaiting a terrifying gunshot or something. Thank God no one was hurt.
I used to work the third shift security in a neighborhood near a university. We often encountered some weird shit, but we mostly dealt with drunken college bros and the like. One night, it's nearly 4 a.m, so we're ending our shift and heading in, when this old, homeless-looking man stops me and asks me to call him an ambulance. I ask him what's wrong, and he's telling me he's having heart palpitations and suicidal ideation. I flag down a co-worker who informs our boss and calls the ambulance. I sit down next to the guy, and he's laying on the sidewalk, and let him talk to me. At first, he's saying what you'd expect from someone who wants to commit suicide, but then it gets dark as hell. He starts telling me about a woman he stabbed because he asked her for $20, but she only gave him a few bucks, so he straight up murdered her. Okay, pretty creepy, but then it gets worse. He just starts going on about how he raped people and committed arson, as well as other horrifying things, and I'm sitting almost alone with him the whole while, as my co-worker is several buildings down on the phone to dispatch. He starts telling me about how his mother used to have sex with her father and brother, and that he saw that, and about how he is a crackhead. When the ambulance arrived, he started cussing and yelling, but at least I was free to go at that point. I understand it was probably, at least partially, the ramblings of a mentally ill crackhead, but it was still unnerving. It's not every day that a stranger confesses to you about murder and rapes that he's committed, especially because I'm a young woman, so that got to me even more so.
This happened almost 20 years ago now. Wow, has it really been that long? It's still a really vivid memory. I was working the overnight shift about 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. at an animal shelter. It was a pretty big place, sort of C-shaped, with the lobby, offices, and puppy pen in the curb, exam rooms and kennels in the tips, and an outdoor walking area in the middle. Most nights, I was alone in the building and sat at a desk all the way in the back of the building, behind the reception counter, but with direct lines of sight to the glass front doors.
Thank you guys for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.